Hello there ladies and gentlemen, it's time for my top 6 current Citadel paints. So only included in this list are paints that are currently available in the Citadel range. Number 6, unsurprisingly there's an orange paint in there, for anyone who follows my colour preferences. No surprise there whatsoever. I've never had any problems at all with this paint, the coverage has always been pretty good. You can see here on these crabs that all the little dabs that I applied to create that dotted effect, they were all with Troll Slayer orange, gradually whitened as it went along. See that I use a lot of orange. If you look at these goblins for instance, now these weren't actually painted completely in Troll Slayer orange, these were done with Model Air orange through an airbrush, and then the touching up was done with Troll Slayer orange. And to my eye, I don't notice any difference between the colours, so that's pretty much perfect. And of course, since it is called Troll Slayer orange, where would we be without... oops. Yeah, there we go. Apologies for that. There's really no particular reason that orange is better than all of the other paints in the range, but this is my top 6, so of course orange had to go in there. Just for colour preference, nothing to do with the technical qualities of the paint. Number 5, we have Reikland Flesh Shade, or is that Reikland Flesh Shade? Well, no matter. Anyway, what I really like about this particular paint is the subtlety. It shades skin tones without overpowering them, and you don't need to water it down. What I found in the past with old Flesh Wash, for instance, if you look at this picture, and look at that horrifically sunburnt dwarf there on the right. Yes, his skin was supposed to be pink, and that's what happens with a tiny bit too much of the old Flesh Wash. You really had to water that stuff down unless you wanted that really sunburnt effect. But with Reikland Flesh Shade, none of that nonsense. Look at that lovely subtle shading between the fingers on that dwarf rune lord there. Lovely, so that's why it takes its place in the top 6. Number 4, Agrax Earthshade. Now I'm sure this is higher on most people's lists, but you'll see why it's not higher on mine momentarily. But for this, it's really the all-purpose, what I would call a wash, what they now call shade. You want to apply it to a colour, you want it to sink into the crevices, you want it to darken those crevices, and you want the model to immediately look finished. Even though this is only perhaps the second colour you've applied to it, you want that part of the model to look complete. That's what I use it for. You can see here on these Belgian bolt action uniforms, there's quite a bit of shading going on there in the crevices, but all that is down to Agrax Earthshade over a light brown colour. And they definitely look as though more time has gone into them than actually has gone into them, which for someone like me who doesn't want to spend a huge amount of time painting is perfect. The same thing on these Belgian Force Publique soldiers, although additionally with these guys, Agrax Earthshade was used in 5 or 6 coats as a shade over the skin, which did actually start the same colour as the rest of those Belgians there. The benefit with darkening it through multiple layers of wash is that you're left with a slightly lighter colour on the raised areas, rather than having to highlight, which is a lot more fiddly. Number 3, Ard Coat. I'm sure there are other products out there on the market that do a similar job, but from what I've heard, nothing beats Ard Coat. The job you want it to do generally is protect a miniature. So for those of us that play games with a lot of metal in the ranges, it is invaluable as a tool. Most of the time I would then apply a matte varnish over the top of it to stop the model being extra shiny, but that double layer of protection, it's almost impenetrable. Unless you are literally just crashing the models together, then there's no way the paint should chip off with this bad boy on there. The other use, of course, is for models that you actually do want to be shiny, so you don't need the matte coat afterwards, such as these slime pools for instance, and it does an admirable job at that. Number 2, Blood for the Blood God. When I first heard about this paint, this was one that particularly excited me because blood effects had been something that I'd struggled with for a long time, and didn't really use them because I couldn't do them well enough. There are plenty of other ways of doing it, there are other products you can use, there are combinations of products you can use, but this is just really, really simple. You just slap it on there, and there you go, instant blood. Looking at this elf here, it looks very, very gory. If you apply this as the final layer of anything onto the model, after all the varnishes, to make sure that you're not messing up the level of shine that it achieves, then it is quite wonderful to behold. I think you'll agree. And on this weapon here, the tutorial on the Games Workshop YouTube channel as well is very useful for this. That's where I went to pick up a few handy-dandy tips before I started using it. And I've never looked back. I'm no longer afraid to apply blood to a weapon or to a corpse. It's exactly what I was crying out for all these years. It just does the job. Well, it's time for the moment of truth. What is my number one current Citadel paint? There you go. It's Girly Man Blue. Whether I've butchered the pronunciation or not, that's irrelevant at the moment, because this is by far my favourite paint right now. Probably my favourite paint from any range, not just Citadel. And here are my reasons. First and foremost, I've found all the blue washes or shades that I've used over the years, they're too strong. Unless you really, really water them down, and that's tricky to get right. So I found that a lot of the shades either stain the model, like the Citadel Drakenhof Nightshade really, really stains the model, which is not the effect I'm looking for. I just want something that's going to gently seep into the crevices, darken them, and just make the whole model look like it's been shaded, which is exactly the effect I achieve by just splattering Girly Man Blue over the entire model. As you can see with this Relics Spatga model there, that is just a one layer of blue with the glaze paint over it. The same thing on these Dreadball Zs. Their armour, just blue with Girly Man Blue over the top of it. It's very subtle and it doesn't overly colour the whole model. It tends to just affect the areas that you've let it pool, and if you cover the whole model in it, that will generally be the recesses. Another reason I really love this paint, I struggled for a long time to find anything that looked good over a metallic colour. I wanted to do nicely coloured metallics for a long time, but I could just never find anything. Washes, they didn't cut it for me, but applying this over mithril silver on these dwarf iron drakes I think is a really, really snazzy look, and they're possibly my favourite unit that I've ever painted just because of that effect. I think it looks really, really cool. And if there are any doubts over the versatility of this paint, purely as a crazy experiment, these Kings of War Goblin Cavalry, if you look at the beasts that they're riding, when I used an airbrush to spray the riders in orange, obviously some orange went onto the beast, but not all the way down, and it gradually gets lighter the further you are away from the source that the orange was actually being sprayed onto. So, completely on a whim, I decided to cover the entire monster in Girly Man Blue, and this is what happened. It just ties it all together really nicely, and it doesn't overly affect the underlying colour, which is what a wash undoubtedly would have done. And you can't see too much, but on the underside where it was still white, it gives a lovely effect on that as well. So yeah, that's definitely my favourite paint at the moment, and it's going to take something pretty impressive to topple that from the number one spot. But maybe one day. You may have noticed that there weren't a whole lot of base or layer or metallic colours in there. That's because what I found with them is even the good ones, for the most part, other ranges do them just as well. The paints I chose specifically, I have not run into anything in another range that does exactly the same job to the same level. So if you know of anything out there that can do the job that I'm using these paints for, even better, then please let me know. I'm here to be educated, and also let me know your top 6 paints in the current Citadel range. Well, it's time for me to go and paint some more models, so ta-ta for now.